Welcome to Faith Works Live. Here's your host, Rebecca Haynie.
And here we meet again. Thank you for listening to Faith Works Live. I hope you hear the smile, because this is my favorite thing in the world, to be able to talk to you, just between you, me, and the microphone. I love this. It's such a blessing to get to talk about things that really matter and what it looks like to live out our faith in this crazy old, chaotic, mixed up, and dark, oftentimes dark and confusing world. But it's a world that God so loves. And that's why you and I are here for just such a time as this. So what does that look like to be a disciple of Christ in the middle of all this? Glad you asked. That's what we talk about. And so I really couldn't do it without you, without our producer, Ron Carlson. Hi, Ron. It's good to have you with us. He always makes us sound good. And the struggle that I think a lot of us have is how best to engage in conversations of eternal significance without being, weird or a jerk or seems like it's coming out of a blue. How can we be, politically now, how can we be most effective, right? That's the conversation that so many of us want to have. You start talking with, someone in the grocery store or someone that you meet. Hopefully it's face-to-face and not just trading barbs online, which is more and more how the majority of us interact, unfortunately. But when you're out in the real world with real humans, how do we talk about things that really matter? And to that end, I'm very excited to welcome back to our studio a man that needs no introduction, but I'll give it one. Joel Willoughby from Brains and Bibles. I just wanted to see how you'd react to that.
Well, thank you. I'm honored. Doing very well. Yes.
Pause for dramatic effect.
Right.
Now, remind people about your ministry at Brains and Bibles.
Yeah, Brains and Bibles. It's a name specifically, there we go, chosen, because those two things should never be disconnected.
Right.
And so just trying to help people to know and communicate the person and word of God. I focus on strengthening churches, equipping them for the work of the ministry. So the big three things: evangelism, discipleship, Bible study. And so a lot of things fit underneath those umbrellas. And that looks different everywhere I go. I should meet a church where they're at and build from there.
Excellent. Well, what we're going to talk about today, because you've been on and we've had great apologetics conversations in the past. We talked about evidence for the resurrection. We've talked about evangelism. We've talked about global missions and a whole bunch of other fun stuff along the way as well. And I think today I'd love to talk about something that you've been focused on quite a bit recently. You've got a new article that's coming out focusing on how to relate when we're having conversations. So in an evangelistic context, how to naturally go from talking about the creation in the world around us to the creator and some of the evidences for that. And I mean, I love good apologetics evidence. I love the top 10 lists. I love knowing, okay, here's the fun facts about all of this. But then eventually, I want to get into all of that because you've done some amazing research. You've got some great examples for us, too, about real life, just amazing things that are around in creation that we can understand, that we can talk about, that anyone would find fascinating. And then I think the key point and what makes your article different is that you're talking about how to use that and how to make the transition then from, fun fact about this creative thing to the actual creator that made you and knows you and loves you. So that is going to be really exciting. I'm can't wait to get into it. So what inspired this focus for you? And let's talk a little bit about how this is effective for people in conversations about faith.
Sure thing. Yeah, it's modeled after real conversations I've had. So this is not just something, trapped in an office, books everywhere, and not actually having human contact. Okay?
That's dangerous.
Yeah, it does get dangerous. Yes, heavy learning, but also heavy contact.
Yes.
At the same time. So anyways, this is even the article. It's going to be in the Baptist Bulletin. It'll be in the March spring issue there. The spring issue that is coming out in March. There we go. And I'm looking forward to just showcasing a way that I have found effective in sharing the gospel. And I'm not results driven. That's not my focus. It is, not as in people that would say, yes, I do now trust in Jesus Christ as my Savior kind of thing. I'm not looking at that because we're not supposed to look at numbers, But here's a way that I've seen people cause them to think. They pause, they ponder, they want to keep talking. And I'm using the name of Jesus Christ in actual Scripture, which it's easy for people to want to keep talking if you don't do those two things.
Yeah.
So that's a crucial point actually as well. So that's it's a fake conversation, but modeled after my own conversation style and what I would talk about. the two big things that Paul prays for is opportunity and confidence when he talks about evangelism. The biggest things he wants prayer for. And so what I try to simplify for people too is opportunity is actually not that hard. I prefer, I think, face-to-face. I think it's a big deal, not just, keyboard cowboy kind of thing, but going out there to people and, that's all there is. Opportunity is just meeting somebody, saying hello.
Yeah.
And so when I've presented this even to other churches and things, a lot of times I'd say, you can say things like, hello, how are you? Because some people think, I don't know how to get a conversation started.
Sure.
It really is that simple.
Meet other human, extend hand in greeting.
Right. There's so many little things.
Yeah.
And so it's just sometimes when you say it out loud, that's when people go, that's not so tough after all.
That.
Yeah.
Well, and especially for you not to laugh too loudly, because they're especially in a younger generation, and we've gone through a lot of things as a society that have distanced ourselves from one another, or people who maybe are a little bit, on in years, and they find themselves that they're not as connected with the world around them as they'd like to be, and they think, well, what do I say? What I think of is so different than what the 18-year-old cashier at the grocery store might be thinking. But we can actually bridge a lot of those gaps. I think if we have confidence in the fact that God wired us for relationship, and that your experience may be unique or maybe different, but is also still interesting. And again, you're here for a purpose that's valuable. And then if you can just see the other person and the value in that other person, I think Christians are uniquely positioned. We've talked about the loneliness epidemic in the past, so I know it's a bit of a veer, but we as Christians can see people, and people yearn to feel seen. They yearn to belong. They yearn to feel like I'm here for a reason. And most of the world around us, especially from an evolutionary standpoint, that has been the dominant presupposition in our worldview foundation in our culture for, over 150 years at this point. And I don't think it's done anything good, honestly.
Right.
I mean, not what we would expect from a lie, but it's just, if you notice, it hasn't built a very strong or very stable foundation for any of us to, I think
Quite
all
the
of those,
opposite, really.
those worldviews have consequences, as we say. And so that relates to the topic at hand too. If everyone out there is just yearning for purpose and meaning, and yet they look around the world and they're taught that there isn't really a purpose and a meaning, whether they're looking, out at some trees or some birds, or they're looking at themselves in the mirror, I think that highly correlates with feelings of loneliness, purposelessness, depression, and all of those things that we're seeing on the uptick today. And we have a generation, especially the last several, really are crying out for connection.
Right, absolutely. And to take some of the pressure off and to go along with what you said there, a couple basic ideas I have for people is be genuine, be yourself. Don't try to be someone else. And just a quick funny story with that. I remember a time when I was encouraged as a pastoral intern with another guy to go hang out at this park, and a bunch of guys were playing basketball. Now this is city. This is more of a rougher neighborhood. But it was one I was kind of familiar with already. Okay. And so they see, me and this other guy, and I'll just say we looked a lot different than the people that were playing basketball.
Okay.
And we come in there, and we just picked up a game. I am no basketball. I'm a tall guy. People think I can do things. I cannot. I got roped into basketball younger because I can get rebounds, especially like junior high. I was just, Saul was head and shoulders above the rest.
Yeah.
I was more than that. I was like elbows and head above the rest. And so I would literally miss every shot. I missed like 6 in a row, but I get every rebound.
Give it to Joel.
Yeah, it was hilarious. I couldn't do anything. This is a big dinosaur out there. But anyways, so I get out there. And I didn't pretend like I was anybody else. And it was just a fun game. And afterwards we had a conversation, And so it was really cool. I didn't have to be somebody else.
Right.
And they respect that. People, they can figure out if you are trying to be like them.
Yes.
You're trying to,
yeah.
Or something. They appreciate genuineness. And also, if you're born again, if you know Jesus Christ on a personal, intimate level as your Savior, your friend, things like that, then the idea is that you have a story to share about how you've been changed. And you may not think that's fascinating, but that's your problem. So, you need to figure out how it actually is fascinating.
Sure.
It really is. It's a divine miracle there. And so you just talk to people about it. That's a simple thing. But once again, the article goes back to the transitions. Like, how do you just start? Small talk and all that, and you move on. And the big idea of it is when I'm getting into it, I want to show them, I want to give them a good case for there being creation. Mm-hmm. And then from there, I say, well, if you're created, anything is created, there's purpose. Mm-hmm. So that means you have purpose. All things created have purpose. Well, not just purpose, though, because if you create something and you intend it to do something, well, you're going to want to check it out to see if it actually does the thing you made it to do.
Right.
So there's accountability there. Mm-hmm. And of course, if there's accountability, there's an expectation for you to do something. Well, there's going to be a judgment, that's like a taboo word, right? But judgment's like discernment. You're just telling the difference between two things, You practice judgment when you put clothes on in the morning, at least most people should. And,
No judgment.
right.
No judgment.
It's like, this one's good, this one's not good, right? So then there's got to be this final judgment from the supreme being that created, saying, hey, did you do the things that I made you to do?
Because he gets to make those determinations
he does.
if he's the one who made us.
Absolutely. Just like the guy that made the fridge, he expected to cool stuff down. And if not, what do you do with it? Well, you either fix it or you throw it away. Salvation, you could say, is the fixing part. Mm-hmm. And then throwing it away is if it won't get fixed.
Right.
That's kind of the idea there. But.
Yeah. Well, I find that very reasonable. I think I'm following the logic. I get to where you're going with that. Can you give us a few examples of what types of things we can talk about? Because I've seen, the 5-hour creation debates, along with everyone, I'm sure, that doesn't have hobbies.
Yeah, right.
I think this is how I spend my free time. And I do find that fascinating, but it can also get a little bit in the weeds sometimes. And there's, some people may be more naturally interested in that than others. And some situations may naturally lend themselves to those more in-depth intellectual debates versus just like meeting somebody for the first time or striking up a casual conversation. Then you're probably not ready to go into a treatise on, whether or not we have a 6-day, 7-day creation week versus millions and millions of years, for example, the dating, radiocarbon dating, all of that. So I would love to get a couple of examples, not to give away, the whole article for free, but can you give us a sneak peek?
There's lots of other things I won't say, just to still make it appetizing, of like kind of precursory information, little tips, just little to keep it simple. Here's what Christ commands.
We've got a trailer, like all the good movies.
So there's a few things I say that these are things you need to be doing. A quick explanation of some verses, not too much there, just something simple to take away that can really help you out. One thing is when you do your evangelism, you balance on a 3-legged stool. Gospel's in the center, and then you have your apologetics and polemics on either side. I give like a 1-sentence definition for each of those things, how it can help out. But essentially, apologetics, you're just defending truth. And then polemics is when you're lovingly poking holes in opposing worldviews. And just know when there's a time and place to do that. They're balancing you out, that kind of a thing. And so you just check out the article for that. But yes, once you get into it, once you actually get to the point where you're saying, hey, have you ever thought about this? Mm-hmm. You bring something up. One really interesting one, because everyone can relate to this. I like simplicity. That's still kind of profound. And so, who hasn't seen a tree? Okay, so that's pretty universal.
I think that I shall never see a poem as lovely as a tree.
Aw. I like that.
That's all I've got.
All right. We'll stop there.
That's my best. Okay. Go ahead, Joel. Don't leave me hanging.
Well, it's just a simple idea. You go outside, you look up the trunk of a tree, you look up there, you just notice the branches and notice how they come off at different places. And it really seems random until you realize those branches had to come off in the way they did so that the trunk could go straight or grow towards nutrition. It'll do that on purpose, sunlight, water, things like that. And then also to maximize the amount of sunlight the leaves get, so it can eat, the photosynthesis and everything, and just get good air in between and whatnot. So there's lots of things it does there, just the branches growing out. And so then you think, well, it's kind of like how it is around the entire earth. If they didn't have this growth pattern, then you really wouldn't have trees. It would all fall apart. It'd grow weird, and a lot of them would die off. And we have to have all these trees so we can breathe well. And of course, all the lumber that we have, need of, and just keeping warm with fire, and around the world, especially earlier on, thousands of years ago when you didn't have all this technology, right? That's how crucial that was, and to be able to keep them growing and doing all these things, super important. So then you take the idea, and you go, now, why does it do that? And that goes to this, the big fancy thing called DNA. But not to get too technical. I don't like getting too technical. Know your crowd. Some people, it's better. They like it, and if you can do it, then they will appreciate it more. But know your crowd, and I like to keep it simple, even if they think they're wanting the more technical things. And so I just say, hey, look, on this one little seed of this tree, you have all the information that it will ever need for its entire lifespan, and even to reproduce. And that's an amazing thing. This DNA it's not just a blueprint; it's a living blueprint that helps it optimize itself for everything. How it should grow, repair itself. Even you cut into a tree, it'll fix itself. That's a kind of a cool thing. How does it know to do that? How does it know what it's supposed to look like? How does it know that this is the best thing to do? An evolutionary standpoint, everything has to fail first. Well, if you fail, then you can't really do much after that.
Right.
Especially when you're talking life or death.
Exactly.
So it's a major problem. So the idea is just to show them this, but then it's like, okay, that's information. Anything that has DNA, which is any living thing, it has to be able to read the information, to understand it, to translate it, to copy it. Instantly. From the very first moment it was around, it has to do all this. That's an incredible amount to take in. So, just kind of like pause and let that sink in. That's a huge deal.
Yeah.
So intelligence can only come from intelligence. That's just the bottom line. And
Those are controversial thoughts, Joel.
Yeah, they are. And, I try to remind people to take it slow with this kind of information. Sometimes it's the first that someone's ever thought this way.
Sure.
They never have thought this way before. So let them digest it. And when they respond to you, a lot of times it's the first time they're articulating these thoughts. So they might not even really fully buy into what they're saying even. And so it's good to even repeat information back. Is this what you're saying? Is this what you think? And be kind about it. Share ideas. Take the position of a learner. And I just, I'd really want to hear what you think. And remember that this is a lot to do with genuine, real relationships. People will figure it out if you're not really interested in them as a friend, as a person.
Yes, that's true.
And you really need to be. Like, if you are a Christ follower, it should be a natural thing. I mean, these people bear God's image. Do you love God or not?
Yes.
It's actually pretty simple. If you don't love these people, then you got a problem.
Right.
It's on you. Right. So you work through it that way. And just this, so then what I'm starting to do now is I've already given two things, really. So the idea of branches growing out, that's no accident. You see a design, there must be a designer. Is that old idea? And then the second thing was about information. So it has to come from an intelligent being. Well, cause and effect, right? If there's an effect, there has to be a cause. So all life comes from life. So eventually you think to yourself, well, even if there is a God, then where did he come from? Because there must be a cause before him or life. So then what I say is, I like the way you're thinking. It's very smart to think that way. It's logical. I appreciate that. It is actually more logical to believe, and I actually have a whole thing in this that goes longer, but just to keep it summarized, it's actually more logical to believe there's an ultimate being that has intelligence, will, and ability that never had a beginning. That's actually more logical than an infinite number of causes.
Okay.
Because you literally cannot have an infinite number of causes. You literally cannot. And so some people, they just say it like it's a magic wand, but you literally cannot have that. Someone might say you literally cannot have someone ever, not begin either. I say, well, that's just because you've never known something to not begin. Your mind can't comprehend it. Just because your mind can't comprehend it doesn't mean it's impossible. So an infinite number of causes is actually impossible. So
there has to be a first cause.
Yes, just because it's hard to understand doesn't mean it's illogical.
Okay.
So it's illogical to have an infinite number of first causes. It's actually logical to have the infinite first cause. And so there has to be something that's alive to produce life. It has to have intelligence. It has to know to create. It has to have the ability to create and the will to want to create. And let's just throw the remaining element of personhood in there, emotion.
Right, sure.
And why is there a universal sense of humor? Around it changes from culture to culture.
Mine is the universal sense of humor. Whatever I say is funny, that is the determining factor.
Right.
Like that right there. That was funny.
Yeah, well, I'm sure it was. But even if you have a dry sense of humor, if whatever it is, there's a sense of humor that's universal.
Right.
Why is that? There must be a universal thing. You could even go into other universal things like the appreciation of beauty. Why does that exist?
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense. There's no evolutionary reason to appreciate beauty. For life to really happen, even if I say that there was absolutely nothing and something came from nothing, which is literally insane. I have to really think about that. But if there's actually something that came from nothing, okay, I'll give that to you. And then you say that something alive came from something not alive, which is so far from being proven. People talk about chemical stuff. I'll just say it that way for the spare audience. And it's if you get a real chemist out there, they can explain to you in detail how we're not even close to coming up with some way, even if it's RNA world and things. If people that know what that means, it's not even close. There's no way.
Artificially create life from non-living things.
Yes.
Right? They can enhance the things that are already alive, that already have that germ of life.
Yeah.
But what they cannot do is to take something never living, non-living, and then create a living thing out of it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and the idea is like they have teams of scientists, top PhDs of the world from all around the world, all getting together to try to make life come from non-life to prove that life can come without intelligence. That's a lot of intelligence trying to prove that life can come without intelligence. That's an interesting idea.
Is that irony?
That's a lot of irony.
That sounds ironic to me.
So you can go on and on with these things. Like for me, it just comes more naturally as I've been doing it for a long time. And I'll have these conversations, and there's just so much more you can get into with these sort of things. But, I guess I didn't finish my thought, though. But if you had, just life coming from, or something coming from nothing, and then life coming from non-life, well, then you still have that, and this ties into beauty and whatnot, you still have to have at least a one male and female of something, some kind of living sludge or whatever. And then they have to be able to find each other. They have to be able to want to reproduce with each other, which actually goes into beauty. They have to have the ability to take in the things that keep them alive and push out the things that are bad. They have to be able to find those things, recognize them, process them. They have to be able to have the full reproductive systems. And this is just scratching the surface. And all those things have to be fully functional at the same time for both the male and female, and they have to find each other and the desire and everything. And then you talk about you don't want to believe in miracles. Okay.
Right. The odds of all of that happening without some sort of design or ordered cause is astronomical. That beggars belief.
So Jesus, he fulfills like 300 prophecies in his first earthly ministry already. And, for you to believe in that is actually mathematically more probable than what I just described. So just to get people to think through things logically a little bit, reason with them. And so what am I doing? I'm showing them a few things. I'm showing them that I don't have a blind faith. I do have faith, absolutely. I'm not afraid to admit that. But it's not a blind faith. There is lots of things that affirm it in this world, lots of evidence. Also, I'm showing them that I'm not a complete moron. They may have their doubts, right? But I've thought about this, okay? And then I'm really giving a strong case to show that we probably are created. And if so, that goes back to my previous point of purpose, accountability, and judgment. So that's a good start there.
Wonderful. Well, that's a lot to chew on already, and I have some questions that are related to it. And I know you've got some more good examples and some more options for us to have some of these cool conversations. So we learn it first here, folks, and then we go out and spread it and share it. It'll be exciting.
Yeah.
You know how you find out something new, some new factoid or some, headline that you saw, and it's surprising and interesting to you, and you just want to share it. Like, hey, did you hear? this new and now I can't think of one, so it's a poor example, but you have some for us, Joel. Like, that's a lot of people have such trepidation about beginning a faith conversation, especially with someone they don't know very well, because they think it'll immediately shut down, it'll be awkward, weird, and then they feel pressure because it's like they're a bad Christian because they're not out talking about Jesus effectively. So I just love finding out these interesting, amazing facts about the good way that God created this world. And even as you just defined all of those different layers that have to be in place, even for something as simple as as a little acorn growing into a big oak tree, how on earth do all of that information that needs to be there, all of the natural processes that need to be there in order for this tree to not only grow and thrive and survive, but then continue and then reproduce after its kind and then just keep going for the next several thousand years? Like, how does that even happen? That's amazing. And we walk by it every day and we don't think about it. So having that wonder about the way God made us and that just little added seed of information, that's the type of thing that I think anybody would be fascinated by if it's presented in a genuinely fascinated way. So I want to get into more of those examples. And I've got a couple of questions based on what you just said, too, about some pushback that I could expect that we might receive from an atheist or someone who is just, a little bit skeptical of the idea of a God. And, after the last 50 years of public schooling, I don't blame them.
I get it. Yeah,
we got to go with what we know. And so I'd love to challenge some of those presumptions.
Please do.
And we'll get into more of that. It's going to be so fun with Joel Willoughby from Brains and Bibles. And you'll hear more in just a minute. Don't go anywhere. You're listening to FaithWorks Live. There's no better time than now to stand for life. And you can stand with Iowa's original pro-life organization, Pulse for Life. They're the longest standing nonprofit pro-life organization in Iowa, and they're dedicated to informing, educating, and inspiring a new generation to value the sanctity of all human life, from fertilization until natural death. They serve at the State House. They educate in classrooms, at events. They proudly serve on the coalition of pro-life leaders. They are on the front lines of the battle against this throwaway culture of death that we see all around us, and we are winning ground. Hearts and minds are changing, and the pro-life movement is continuing to grow. And you can be a part of the exciting things that are happening right here in our own backyard at pulseforlife.org and get your finger on the pro-life pulse. Sign up for their newsletter, find ways that you can make a difference, and how you can change hearts and minds with their pro-life apologetics course, pulseforlife.org. In today's world, security has never been more vital. And at FaithWorks Live, we're proud to partner with VeriGuard Security. It's a professional physical security service, and they're really raising the bar in security and private investigations. Whether you need a team of professional officers to protect what you have worked hard to build, or their mobile security units for multiple properties or large locations, from business or corporate properties to your home or neighborhood. Perhaps you've got an event coming up. They secure quality security coverage for events large and small, because it's about peace of mind and protecting you, your family, your team, and your property. Settle for nothing less than the best when it comes to your security. You shouldn't have to compromise. When it comes to security, you can trust VeriGuard. Contact them today at veriguard.us. That's VARA guard.us. For security service, you can trust VeriGuard. If you've ever wondered what love looks like, check out Agape Pregnancy Resource Center. They offer free services to help women make informed decisions and prepare for their futures. In particular, in a situation of an unplanned pregnancy, women need to know that the truth about their bodies. They need to know the truth about their babies and all of their options. And they'll find that at Agape Pregnancy Resource Center. Go to agapedsm.com and find ways that you can get involved in this amazing ministry, whether it's free pregnancy testing, STD testing, free ultrasounds and counseling, not to mention practical resources, hygiene items, parenting classes, just the list goes on. They change lives. This is a place that truly helps people. And if you care about the women in our community, check out agapedsm.com and click on Get Involved today. Hey, what's for dinner? If you're like me, I hear that 15 times a day. And fortunately, I have a plan. It's typically Animus beef at our house. We are such big fans of Animus beef at the Haynie home because it's just great quality beef. There's no steroids or antibiotics. It's naturally raised butcher beef. They sell by the quarter, the half, or the whole, and they support your local meat lockers, so they can help you get it processed in a way that works for you. In this economy, it's good to have affordable options for your meat. And if you're willing to make a good investment in your nutrition for a healthy menu plan, I highly recommend Animus Beef. Contact Dave and Mary Lynn at animusbeef.com. They welcome your questions. They'll help get you on the schedule. They have locker dates coming up. Don't wait. Secure your locker date today. Go to animusbeef.com. That's OHNEMUS beef.com. When a woman faces an unplanned pregnancy, every possible emotion goes through her head. Where can she go for help and for hope? She can go to Intervisions. Here in our metro, we have 2 healthcare clinics where she will find hope and help. From free pregnancy testing and STD testing to free ultrasounds, Intervision serves women and men with STDs who find themselves in vulnerable situations. They're completely free of charge because of generous donations from folks like you. And their medical clinics help their patients get all the information that they deserve that empowers them to make life-affirming decisions. That's what they do at Intervision's healthcare clinics right here in Des Moines. Learn more at intervisionshealthcare.org. That's intervisionshealthcare.org. And you can call 24 hours a day at 515-440-CARE. That's 515-440-2273. Welcome back to FaithWorks Live. I know you're enjoying this discussion with Joel Willoughby. How do I know? Well, I am. So if you're like me, and I know I am, we're enjoying this time talking about how to glorify really the Creator through His creation and to have conversations with people on a spiritual level that may be a lot easier than we think, but it does help to be prepared. So we're looking for opportunity to talk with real humans that God really loves in this real world. And there's so much evidence all around us for a Creator and therefore His purpose for us. And, what if we move from creation to Creator, then a whole world of questions and ultimately answers start opening up. And once you get people to start thinking, they can a lot of times come up with those questions and those conclusions on their own. And we're there walking alongside them to introduce some of these concepts, and in particular, the gospel of Jesus Christ. So all of that wrapped up in a conversation about an acorn or an oak tree or DNA. And Joel Willoughby from Brains and Bibles is giving us some facts to focus on and some helpful questions, I think, to lead us in the transitions here between how to start a conversation about this, what we might talk about that would engage the attention, the imagination of someone that we're talking to, and logically lead to a conclusion about, or at least, more questions about not only intelligent design, but creators, but the creator of the Bible. And I think that's what I love to talk about, because there are a lot of people that would say, there are a few that are committed atheists. And they'll just kind of laugh you off and say, that's ridiculous. Everybody knows, we just randomly evolved from sludge some unspecified billions of years ago, except fascinatingly for Richard Dawkins, who's now his favorite theory is essentially that there were aliens that came from somewhere else that seeded Earth. And I always you remember the Bill Nye and Ken Ham debates?
Yes.
You remember that?
Yes.
I still remember he thought apparently it was a mic drop moment when he started talking about how he was arguing evolution. Bill Nye was arguing evolution the whole time. And then he said something like, well, we don't know where life came from. Basically, we could have come from an alien somewhere. Yeah. And that's a loose paraphrase. But I thought, well, then that just moves all the bullseye to somewhere else. You didn't prove any point at all, Bill Nye. I want all of my nostalgia from the 90s back. That's what I want. You in your lab coat, you realize that now you just moved the goalpost, but you haven't actually proven anything.
Well, they certainly help us out. I love when people say that. So I say, your best theory right now is that more powerful, more intelligent beings made us to exist. Okay,
I agree.
I think we're onto something.
Right.
You're following the rabbit trail very well.
Follow that. Follow those breadcrumbs there. But we do get some pushback, right? So if people have been, and I think that's something that needs to be remembered when Christians from a creationist worldview go and interact with the wider world. We cannot presume that anyone around us has ever heard these ideas before.
Right.
I think we're coming from a time when Judeo-Christianity kind of used to be, at least the general awareness of Judeo-Christianity used to be the foundational presumption. And now we've moved back to this sort of neo-pagan age. And we can't assume that anybody has any knowledge whatsoever of what biblical accounts of creation or what a Christian actually believes. They probably have a stereotype.
Yes.
In fact, I bet they do have a stereotype about that. And so what we have to be conscious of the truth, but also understanding in the fact that, there may be people that are aggressively anti-God that you'll run into. But I think the vast majority of people are just, they don't know, they never heard. They've never really thought about this. So tailoring things towards that audience, what would you expect to hear in response to some of those questions that you've already posed? Or if you can kind of walk us through conversations that you may have had, if you say, well, all of this is designed. And people are like, I don't know, I've never really thought about that before. So it seems like there's a lot of random accidents. It seems like there's a lot of death. There's a lot of sickness. That doesn't seem to be very good. And there's a lot of things that we don't seem to know the purpose for. So how does that fit in with your idea of an intelligent and even caring and morally good creator? Yeah,
boy, you said a lot of things there. So I'm going to try to...
Welcome to my world, Joel.
So usually...
You just pick one and hang on.
The idea of God being good while we observe evil and suffering, that would deserve its own episode, I think, to hash through that.
That's next time.
Real quick, what I'd like to point out to people is that, what if you were to get a flat tire and you would say, this is bad, but then you realize that if you didn't, you would have been in this big wreck, hit by a drunk driver in the intersection or something like that. So then was it good that you had a flat tire? I said, we have to really think about what good is and why we say it's good. I say, really, it takes an omniscient being to know what good it is, because you have to consider every single ramification for an infinite amount of time, for an infinite amount of people and things. And so it's even like Christians call Good Friday when Jesus was crucified. Why was that good? Why do we say it's good? Because what it accomplished. So it's sort of that idea. So I'll just say that about that part, because it just keeps exploding from there. But simply the idea of, have you really thought about what good is and why you believe it's good? And if you see a plane crash and it was horrible, well, what about the millions of other plane landings? So if God gets credit for the plane crash, you better get credit for the plane landings. And so just trying to teaching them to be fair as well, not just considering what good and evil is and why it's called that. Suffering is not inherently evil. You can look at lots of examples in nature and things, and just even learn how to ride a bike. You can get some bumps and scratches and bruises there, right? Something like that. Anyways, that was that part. What was another part? I got stuck on that.
Sure, no problem. I think the examples of things that can catch your attention too. You were just teasing us in the preamble to the show, which is always so interesting, and I always wish the audience could hear. Maybe that's like our gold star audience members are the folks go to the head of the class and they get the behind the scenes.
With the right subscription.
That's yet
there you go.
Yes, exactly. Sign up here. I probably should
Patreon,
do something like that.
Go for it, something like that. There you go.
That's, again, next show.
That's an idea.
They would for you, Joel. The other facts that you were talking about include an interesting story about the case of the vanilla bean.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So we've got the beans and the bees that you're going to talk to us about.
The beans and the bees. Right. So what I like to do is, I usually do this more for the Christian that says, I believe God created, but he probably used evolution. Okay. And so for clarity, I would say that when I am sharing the gospel with somebody, I do not make a big deal about a 1 week creation, even though that's where I stand very strongly, and I do whole talks on that. So, and it does get people to think, though, either way. it's a fun story, so you'll like it. This is the idea, and I'm fuzzy on some details, but because I want to be accurate, anyways. So you have some folks from Spain coming down to the South America territory, and they're checking it out. And we're gonna ignore all the context and peripherals here, just get to the main points. And they find out about vanilla, and they go, "This is pretty awesome," and so they want to go check it out. And it turns out that vanilla comes from a bean that is grown on an orchid. So this orchid will grow around something, right? And different species and whatnot, but it's the basic idea. Mm-hmm. So they take some back, these orchids, and they bring them back to Spain, and they start to plant them and grow them. Well, these things are not reproducing. So they are artificially, making their cuts and everything, and they keep growing them. And so then they go, this is a big problem, though, because it's not naturally reproducing. Mm-hmm. So we got to figure this thing out. So they go back down to South America, and they do a little study. They watch these things. What they find out is that the vanilla orchid only has one natural pollinator in the world. Only one natural pollinator in the world. And that is the Melipona bee. Okay? And so the
Melipona bee.
The Melipona bee. Very unique. There's lots of species of that as well, but the basic idea behind them that makes them really unique too. They don't have stingers. Now, if you get close to and they don't even go into a normal. They're honeybees, right? But they're not like in that normal beehive you think of, like kind of like hanging in a tree or whatever. This is actually in a tree trunk. They go into tree trunks.
Okay.
And they'll call them the cajones, I believe. And so what they'll do is they'll go inside these things, and they don't produce near as much. It's like the normal honeybee that we get our normal honey from. I think it's something like they produce like 33 liters a year, something like that, of honey. Whereas these Meliponas, they would only do like 1 liter a year.
Wow. And
so their honey tends to be a lot more expensive. You'll see these like down, like Cozumel, famous vacation spot, or even that's just an island, but the other side of the water there into the continent, and the rest of it. They would have these others, and they pollinate basically a lot of these more exotic type flowers and stuff. So a lot of medical properties there. It's really cool. Anyways, getting off track a little bit. So these bees, they don't have any stingers. You can just pick them up like puppies. It's really nice. You can handle them. They will bite though. They can bite. So
don't do that. Maybe,
but not as bad as venomous stingers. So
sure,
that's yeah. But anyways,
picking your poison.
Yeah, right. Well, literally. And so then you have these guys pollinating. But what's even more fascinating is that only once a year, each of these vanilla orchid blossoms, they're only going to bloom for like 1 to 3 hours once a year.
Really?
And so these Melipona bees are watching and waiting, and they see it, and they pollinate it at the right time, and that's what helps it continue. Now, the only natural pollinator, so that means before people, or at least you could say even before we learn to artificially pollinate and whatnot, this is the only way it would survive. That means that the vanilla orchid and the Melipona bee had to both be completely fully functional with all their information within a very short period of time. Mm-hmm. And so if you look at the creation days, the vanilla orchid and the Melipona bee would have been created on different days. And so if a day was more than a day, or there was a significant gap between days, and usually the case is millions of years, or at least hundreds of thousands of years, at least, is the case, well, then there would be no vanilla today. And so the fact that we have vanilla everywhere means that there had been a short time in which they were fully functional together. Mm-hmm. Even from just a proving creation, that's still significant. And you could make the case maybe that there was other natural pollinators that are now died off. That'd be, I guess, the pushback on that. Mm-hmm. But once again, no proof of anything. And you have an argument from silence, which is you can only have so many of those.
Sure. Well, and I find that that's a fascinating argument that you would have to have some sort of justification to see the other side.
Yeah.
Right. I think lots of times people make assumptions based on a few things that we're all taught, and no one ever questions it because they're those big presuppositions, again, of worldview. So the reason that I use that is because it really does undergird everything. It affects all that you see and all that you are, and the decisions that you make have to be, if it's consistent, it needs to be based on those presuppositions. And I had an interesting conversation, kind of unrelated, but it was with an atheist, and he's with the Atheist Freethinkers Association. association. So he's very committed, I guess you could say, to his way of thinking. And we met down at the Capitol, and we were kind of talking about two different things. But I was saying this idea of like looking for some common ground. And I said, we have to have this shared view. I said, I think we agree on the idea of inherent rights. And he said, no, I don't agree with that. And I said, okay, well, if we're going back to the Declaration of Independence, which is what we're quoting, that at least our founders believed that, and the country that they then founded was based on the idea of a creator. He said, no, I don't agree with that. I said, well, they said so.
Yeah. It's kind of hard to get around that. Yeah.
Endowed, that men are created equal, and that we are endowed by our creator. There's proper noun, big C, by our creator with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that these are inherent rights, meaning you just have them because you exist, is the broad view of that. And honestly, it's because God created us in his image, and we do have these rights. We are the Imago Dei, and therefore we are recognizing that he's created all of us, male, female, any background, any melanin quotient, any language, any age, anything, any ability, and we are all dignified in that image, that we all have to be protected equally because of that image. And he says, no, I don't agree with that. Rights come from the will of the people. I said, I don't think you believe that. I don't. And here's why. I mean, I accept that you're telling me that. I said, but I know that you believe, because he had already talked about how at one point that the Constitution was flawed because at one point people that looked like him and his ancestors were 3/5 of a person. And I said, I would agree that that's terrible and that's wrong. And the reason is because God made you in his image. And God made me in his image, and that's not based on how we look. I said, when government then says anything else, then you're actually kind of making my point. If government says anything else, they're failing to recognize your inherent dignity and worth that you already have. I said, you and your ancestors were never 3/5 of a person. Never, because God created you to be whole and distinct and unique. You had those rights. Government failed to recognize those rights. And that is a horrible travesty of justice based not on the fact that they should have, that not enough people believed it, but that everyone should have seen it and known the truth of that because that's how God made you. Yeah. So I don't think we reached that common ground that I was hoping for. I was just kind of shocked that he didn't really see that. But you will have people that spring forth if your presumption is there is no creator, and you absolutely have to stake that claim on that hill, then that impacts everything else that you see. Even if it kind of contradicts some of these other points, you sort of have a cognitive dissonance around all of us today when going back to this societal yearning to be known and recognized and valued and to have meaning. We look around us for meaning and we think, well, maybe I'll find a meaning in an identity. Maybe I'll find a meaning in a pronoun. Maybe I'll find a meaning in popularity and having enough people that like what I say. I put it out online and my video gets 70,000 likes and then suddenly I'm, a fulfilled and happy, wonderful person. Yay. And then you look around on that, high mountaintop and wonder, is this it? Is this all that there really is? Isn't there more than this? And we go out chasing more and more. We have people we have a higher percentage of our population that is drug addicted now than ever before, including especially young men right now. And if you include drugs like, I guess, social and mental drugs like pornography, then it's even worse. Oh, yeah. It's astronomically worse. And women are not exempt from any of this. Every addiction touches more households, like on your average block. If you look to your left and to your right, there's addiction in one of those households statistically. All of those things, I think, can be traced back to what we believe about who we are and where we come from. And that's why I think these conversations are so critical. It also goes back to what God says in the Bible. He says, all of creation will praise me. He says that the trees clap their hands and acknowledge God. Now, trees don't have hands, but, follow the poetry here.
Anthropomorphism.
That what we have, right, yes. Word of the day. Thank you, Joel. But that's why it's so important, I think, to engage in these discussions, even with people with whom we might disagree from very different backgrounds. We just have to be understanding about where they come from, and that if we come from opposed places, that we will have very different ideas. But many times those ideas, if you're arguing against God, they will reveal themselves to be illogical or contradictory. That's been my experience anyway.
Yeah. A piece of what you said there, I'll spend the whole time, if I just if I talk about morality, that ends up being a whole thing in and of itself as a proof of creator, morality itself. What's interesting is if we say that we are all animals, just more or less evolved, it's actually very self-defeating. It's contradictory because, a little bit of some crude language here, a little bit, but just the reality of it.
Hang on, Christian radio fans. Earmuffs.
Yeah, it's no cursing, just vulgar. But the idea is that with humans, we murder, but animals kill. We don't. So the vocabulary that we use, and then
we don't consider it murder if an animal kills another animal. It's just what they do.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
There's no. And then the other example is in the animal kingdom they just mate, whereas humans can rape. And so then the interesting thing is if we are all just animals, then why is there no judicial system for these animals? Why is there only a judicial system for human beings?
Sure.
That's an interesting thing. And it's just one of those things I like to just leave and let people think about it.
Yeah.
And just the idea that there is morality, that we're saying something's are good and evil. And I've heard like Sam Harris present his moral landscape, things like that. I don't know if you're familiar with that or not, but I think he does a great job because he's an excellent speaker. He's a good thinker. He's funny. He's witty. He's a lot of wonderful things. He'd be a great friend of mine, I think, but he's not a believer.
Yeah.
And he has some general, I think, logical fallacies actually in that. Just the idea of like this looks better and this looks worse, but it's way more complicated than that.
Right.
Because sometimes things can look bad and they actually are good. If I were to beat someone up for them to stop touching my daughter inappropriately. Okay, is it evil for me to beat him up? Well, you give the context, and it's actually in defense of my daughter and things. So all of a sudden now, so they're going back to good, evil, suffering, and the morality. What determines a moral action? And it must be from outside of ourselves.
Sure. I was going to say by what objective
Yes.
metric can we determine that?
It must be objective, universal, and consistent for something to be truth. And so that's a whole other talk, truth, right? But those are my three big metrics, objective, universal, and consistent for all of time, for all of people, and it has to be outside of ourselves, a standard that we measure up to. And of course, that standard is God, Jesus Christ himself being the example. Did you want me to give some more creation examples?
I'd love it. Let's go through a couple of those, and let's talk about how we can specifically go from talking about creation in general to maybe moving more towards what the Bible says and who Jesus is, and see if we can bridge that before we're
Absolutely. That's actually super simple, really. It's just something you just have to do it.
Sure.
With another example, one of my favorites is so simple. I like simplistic, that everyone can observe. And that is balanced ecosystems, something that people just take for granted. Now, yes, I understand that human beings can unbalance and rebalance ecosystems, but the idea is left to themselves. They are all completely balanced, every one of them. How is this possible? There is this predator-prey relationship that works. Everybody has food, and everybody keeps reproducing. What in the world? Why is it that prey always out-reproduce predators? If evolution was really what it is, then predators would figure out, let's reproduce more and be dominant.
Yeah.
In fact, the ultimate predator of the earth can actually reproduce as much as they want to, the human being, which is totally counterbalanced to every single other thing that's out there. Why is that? That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
How is it that all this life lives in places where they can thrive? It just doesn't make sense. Unless, of course, there was a grand designer, God himself.
Sure.
And then just a quick segue, what I always say, because I don't want to beat around the bush, I don't want it to, I don't want to seem like it's a bait and switch or anything like that.
Right.
I'll very plainly, several times, I'll say something like, and by the way, I do believe the most consistent answer as to who this God is Jesus Christ. I don't bother to talk about the Father, Son, the Holy Spirit.
Okay.
Not yet, because that's a whole other can of worms. And I'm not afraid to talk about it. It's just that it takes a lot of time. In fact, one of my whole talks is how do you explain the Trinity? That's one of my talks. So it's important to learn how to articulate that.
Right.
But the name that is above all names, the name that they must know, is Jesus. And so that's the one I say. And he is labeled as the creator. He is the one that gets all the credit as far as a name goes for our salvation. Now, obviously, the Holy Spirit convicts of sin, in judgment and righteousness and all that sort of thing. And the Father's the grand orchestrator of it all. And he's the one that gave the Son and spirates the Spirit, if you want to be technical, things like that. And so he is the grand conductor. Jesus essentially does all the physical work on earth, and the Holy Spirit does all the spiritual work on earth. That's a good way to divide it up.
Okay.
But I won't go into any of that. I will simply just say Jesus Christ.
Right.
And
through whom all things were made,
Yes.
and without him was
Right.
nothing made that was made.
Yes, it's all for him, through him, by him. Yes, so that's really important to give him the emphasis. So I will just say Jesus, and he is God, and go into what he has done for us. We messed up with sin. And so, that's not the nature of the conversation today, but you do want to make sure you are explaining sin. Don't take any term for granted.
Right, yes.
That they would fully understand. These are common words to us. But even among Christian circles, there is disagreement on exactly how you would define sin.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Or even God. Those that would not believe in a Trinity, even, that would call themselves Christian and whatnot. So that's another tricky thing. So you want to be very careful as to explain God and sin, what that is, why it's a big deal, why we have to have a Savior. A whole part of the gospel is that you need him. You have to call out to him, like Romans 10, right? You call out. The idea is that there's neediness there.
Yeah.
What is faith? What is grace? What is mercy? What is repentance? These are all crucial terms to slowly articulate, because if you don't want to just run, you don't want to do that, 1, 2, 3, repeat after me. That's
Sure.
like the worst thing.
Right. Well, and you mentioned that this is to be seen in the context of hopefully a larger conversation, larger relationship.
Yes,
Maybe you're doing
yes.
coffee. Maybe this you are kind and funny enough or personable enough or at least interesting enough to talk with this person. And I think prayer has to guide a lot of this
Yes.
too, and that's something that
Right.
I hopefully have grown in more as I've been making these types of interactions with people over the years.
Yeah.
Is I used to think I have to have a perfect script of everything to say, and I have to anticipate all the questions,
Yeah.
and if I just have the right answers,
Right.
then that's going to lead them to Jesus,
Yes.
and they're going to say right then and there. And then if that didn't happen, I felt like I was a failure, and that was a whole spiral
Yes.
thing. So now these days, I tend to approach it with a lot more prayer and say, "All right, Lord, you
Yeah.
have a message for this person. And if I can be a part of that, I want to be a part of that. I want to show
Right.
them, I want to lead them to you. I want them to understand who you are and to meet you. And just let me say, what I need to say to get them there. And the overall relationship we're doing, I don't know if you've ever done Dale Tackett's engagement project. He did the Truth Project and the Engagement Project.
No, I know I'm familiar, but no, I did not.
We're really doing, really enjoying as our congregation is Ogden Church of Christ. And so we're doing that on Wednesday nights. We're going through his engagement project. And it's about basically how to love your neighbor and how to engage with the world just one-on-one or through
Sure.
relationship. And he talks about Rosaria Butterfield. And she openly says that the reason that she's a Christian today is because she was invited in by a Christian family to their house to come to dinner and just be who she was and to talk with them about whatever and just do life with her. Like she said, it's 500 dinners at their dinner table. And that I could finally, once that relationship was built, I could finally open up at the level of our relationship. I could ask questions no deeper than our relationship could stand, which I found that really profound. But then Dr. Tackett asks the question, would you invite someone in if you knew they would never accept Jesus, if you knew that they would never become a Christian, never be converted? Right. And that's a gut check. Because for me, I'm just like, okay, well, yes, I want to love them and I want to bring them into Jesus, invite them to church and all those great things. But if they reject you, lots of times the response is to say, okay, I guess they don't want to have anything to do with me. But to continue to love that person is that genuine motivation that you were referring to before. It's not just about checking a box, and it's not about, well, if this conversation doesn't go well, then I, block them or I never talk to them again, or they're never going to want to talk to me. I think seeing it for the long term and being willing to meet someone for coffee once a week, or just to check in on them and walk by when you're walking your dog and just have like a 10-minute conversation there, but it's over the long term. And I think that's really important too.
Yes, absolutely.
Less pressure as well.
Yeah.
You're doing life together.
It's as simple as that. And, and I love that thought experiment, but, the truth is about, what they never believe, the truth is we don't know. And so
Sure.
even more passion, right?
Right, exactly.
And there's so many stories that are out there of people that were the most unlikely candidates, humanly speaking, and even on the deathbed, all the way up, and it gets really real, and they're convinced.
And people who have never been open to any sort of faith or have
Right.
been anti-God in the past may suddenly be open in that moment.
Right. And it's usually because there's been at least one person that's been persistent and consistent in their life. Absolutely. Big stuff there. We have time for another creation thing?
Yeah, sure. We'll make
Okay.
time for you. But
Because I could do this all day. I love this. I'll do one that's kind of quick. So you have these mussels, okay, like you can eat in the river.
Okay.
Okay, so they look like little clams or something, but they're mussels. And what they'll do, it's kind of interesting, is they have some tissue that they push out, and they will intentionally flap it in the current and whatnot. And the tissue is a certain color, size, and they flap it in such a certain exact way that it looks just like a certain little fish. Now, what's interesting about that is it is a very specific certain little fish that it mimics. How does it know to do that? Okay, first off. But it does this
question.
perfectly so that a certain, like, say, bass or something, right? So a certain other fish will be attracted to eat it. Mm-hmm. When it comes down to take a bite of that little fish, in a split second, when this bass or whatever it is opens their mouth, the mussel will shoot like a jet, will shoot its larvae into its mouth. These little larvae will attach, because the mussels, you think about how those are shaped, attaches onto the gills. And it's a symbiotic relationship where it actually feeds off of the fish.
Wow.
And it does this until it gets to a certain maturity, and then they let go, and they just drop down, and that's where they live in the river. And so how many times did this fail before they got it right? Mm-hmm. Because I feel like if it fails in one generation, there's no more mussels.
There's no more.
That's a very complex system. Mm-hmm. Now, if evolution was doing all these things, which, by the way, notice that evolution is always deified, personified.
Right.
People will say evolution did, evolution chose.
The science did. Yeah. You'll
Right.
hear science and evolution equated a lot.
I think it's good to bring that out. Yeah. Notice how people are talking. And a red flag when someone says, well, it must have. What do you mean it must have? You mean you have no explanation for this transition. You have no explanation for this existence. You have no explanation for, because it can't work within your system. So you just say it must have.
Right. It did. Okay.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. So then these mussels, they have these little tissue, and it's all different. Different species have different types of fish that it imitates to attract the other certain kind of fish in that specific river system. And this cycle goes over and over again. It's an absolutely fascinating thing. Mm-hmm. So if you'll hear about these sort of things, they maybe one thing is just, that's kind of cool, but I'll move on. Well, over time, you keep giving them information. And how do you learn this stuff, right? You do have to study. It's a little caveat here. I have to put in there. You can listen to something like this. You have some information. But go out there and just pick something in your backyard and study it. And you'll say there's nothing exceptional about this ant or something, whatever it is, but you'll find out there is. Mm-hmm. Every single thing of creation is exceptional in its own way. It just takes time to study it. Yeah. That's all it is. And so I get very fascinated with these things, and so it's really no effort. I just love doing it. Mm-hmm. Even the horse in its hoof, it has the frog. It's called a frog. It's that soft spot in the middle of the hoof.
Yeah.
Yes. So the reason that's so important is, a horse is standing, and what happens with all that blood? The blood pumps, it goes down into the legs. Naturally, it would pool up, and the horse would be no more because it wouldn't be able to use its legs, and they wouldn't be able to run away, and they wouldn't be able to do lots of things, right? So the frog, what it does is you'll notice if a horse is standing, it'll pick up its leg and put it down. Mm-hmm. It'll just do this constantly. Yeah. What it's doing is every time it puts that leg down, the frog of the hoof gets pushed, and so it pumps that blood back up the leg. Mm-hmm. And that's how it has a circulation system. And so, where did that come from? And I have a whole thing I do with the giraffe. and it's all about why is that neck so long? Because there's no evolutionary benefit to that, none. They say, well, to reach the leaves up high. Okay, what was it living off of with short, stubby legs and a short neck?
Right, because it has to be the short.
Yeah.
It has to be over many, 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 many
Right.
years, right?
Yeah. Yeah, there's so I do this whole thing, especially with kids. I love doing that. But anyways, being very sarcastic, but I keep saying sarcasm alert. Yeah. But so the idea is that there would be no evolutionary advantage. It would have to survive already. So it's like, is it just so tasty that there's this dream that lives on for millions of years within the giraffe family, and they just keep I have a dream. But yeah,
as my grandfather before me, I will taste that leaf.
I will.
Yeah.
This goes into a little of my scenario that I do there, but I'm not gonna do the whole thing. Anyways, there's so many more. There's so many more things.
Sure.
Just pick stuff and study it, and it's amazing. And so someone can only say coincidence so many times.
Right.
And when it defies their very system, the framework of their system, there's only so many flaws you can handle.
Sure.
Because someone could present something to me that I don't have an answer for yet.
Right.
And I can say, that's interesting. I haven't heard of that before. And I do want to learn, and I want to take it in. I don't want to just dismiss it. And I want to say, I want to follow up with you on that. And so in the article, I do talk a lot about prayer. I do talk a lot about how to follow up, all the transitions and things. And so it is important to check all that out. That's the basic idea. It's something actually really simple. It's really simple. And I think it works well. And the big thing is you don't want to just convince someone there's a creator, because they're still going to be lost. You need to show them that this is Jesus Christ, who he is, what he has done for us, what he still is doing and will do. This is very, very important. It's crucial. And actually read Scripture. Now, sometimes the first time I meet with somebody, I'm just paraphrasing. I'm summarizing ideas. But then I will eventually, I like to go through like Genesis 1 through 3, and then the Gospel of John after that. And that's a good start.
Yeah.
And usually, there's just so much information there alone. So
fascinatingly, those two chapters tend to parallel each other. Those two passages, parallel each other very well. That's almost like it was planned.
Almost,
Joel Willoughby from Brains and Bibles. Thank you for helping us use both today. They should never be separate. I agree. And then once your article is published, because we're doing a fun preview today as we speak, but we'll link to that as well in the podcast.
Yeah. This is the first mention ever.
It's a world exclusive right here. You heard it here first, folks. So check it out in the notes. If it's been published, it'll be right there. And I'll just follow up when it's ready. That is so much fun stuff to think about. And I think, again, that gives us confidence as Christians in our faith, that it's not just something that we believe because we were always taught that. I think that's a negative stereotype. But that we have good reasons for our faith. In fact, our pals over at Reasons for Hope do fun resources like that.
I love those guys.
They'll take kids out to, young adults out to I'm old now, so they're all kids to me.
Yeah, right.
But they educate them on animals and on the creation of animals, and they'll take them out to the zoo. And it's a perfect opportunity to talk about how God created all of these animals distinct. If you just look at the variety of the animals, just the giraffe or just a horse or just a zebra by itself is an amazing thing. And then you think of the, times that by about a gazillion and think about the variety, the wonderful, not just intelligence, but super intellect that it would take to create all that. And why? And why make it so attractive? And why make it all work together so seamlessly, so beautifully, and in such creativity? Like, we have barely scratched the surface of the wonders that God has in his creation. Right. And that's kind of the amazing things. I love hearing about inventors and historians and great thinkers of the past that started to recognize these things. And someone like an Isaac Newton or a Galileo and even Albert Einstein would say things like, well, God put it there. I just uncovered what God had put there to find. So that, I think, is the true spirit of science and inquisitiveness and wonder that we can all engage in. And if we all interact on that level, we can all come to the table at about the same place and honestly ask these questions and honestly say, I think the God of the Bible has the answers. So thank you for helping share some of those conversation starters, some of those to help embolden us and encourage us to share with others around us. And we'll have to have you back for all those other conversations
right. There you go.
Like 99 more episodes with Joel Willoughby.
That's right.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate it.
I love it. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Ron, for making us sound good as well. We've come to the end of the episode, but never fear. We have more. We have an archive. So check out Faith Works Live, wherever you get your podcasts. We're on iTunes, Spotify, Spreaker, all that good stuff. Friend us on Facebook to keep in, because you never know what we're going to do next. So you got to keep an eye on where we are. On YouTube, I always say if we haven't been canceled yet, typically it's not the full channel. It's just like certain episodes that people seem to take issue with. So, but yeah, if we're out there, hi, and I'd love to hear your feedback as well, your comments. And me, I'm Rebecca Haynie, saying we have a mission, so let's be about it. Our mission is to love God, to serve people, and to live free.